Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Go Brahmanande. Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 6, and today's text is text number 4. Tat prayoso na kartavyo yata ayur vyaya param na tata vindate semam mukunda charanam pujam. Tat prayaso na kartavyo yata ayur vyaya param na tata vindate semam mukunda charanam bhujam. Tat prayaso na kartavyo yata ayur vyaya param na tate tata vindate semam mukunda charanam bhujam. Please repeat. Anyone?
Tatprayaso na kartavyo yata ayurvyaya param natata vindate kshemam mukunda charanam bhujam.
Tat prayaso na kartavyo yato ayurvyaya param na tata vindate kshemam mukunda charanam bhujam.
Jai, thank you. Anyone else?
Tat prayaso na kartavyo yata ayurviyaha param na tata vindate shemam makunda charanam bhujam.
Anyone else? Tat, for that, sense gratification and economic development. Prayasa, endeavor. Na, not. Kartavya, to be done. Yata, from which? Ayu vyaya, waste of the duration of life. Param, only or ultimately. Na, no, tata, in that way. Vindate, enjoys. Semam, the ultimate goal of life. Mukunda, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can deliver one from the material clutches. Charana Ambujam, the lotus feet. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Endeavors merely for sense gratification or material happiness through economic development, are not to be performed, for they result only in loss of time and energy with no actual profit. If one's endeavors are directed toward Krishna consciousness, one can surely attain the spiritual platform of self-realization. There is no such benefit from engaging oneself in economic development. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. We see materialistic persons busily engaged in economic development all day and all night, trying to increase their material opulence. But even if we suppose that they get some benefit from such endeavors, that does not solve the real problem of their lives. Nor do they know what the real problem of life is. This is due to a lack of spiritual education. Especially in the present age, every man is in darkness. And in the bodily conception of life, not knowing anything of the spirit soul and its needs. Misguided by the blind leaders of society, people consider the body to be everything, and they are engaged in trying to keep the body materially comfortable. Such a realization is condemned because it does not lead humanity toward knowing the real goal of life. People are simply wasting time and the valuable gift of the human form because the human being does not cultivate spiritual life. Because a human being who does not cultivate spiritual life but dies like the cats and dogs is degraded in the next life. From human life, such a person is put into the cycle of continuous birth and death. Thus, one loses the true benefit of human life, which is to become Krishna conscious and to solve life's problems. Om Jnana Tivrandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmitam Yana Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Panchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhurevacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasti Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Endeavors merely for sense gratification or material happiness through economic development are not to be performed, for they result only in a loss of time and energy with no actual profit. If one's endeavors are directed toward Krishna consciousness, one can surely attain the spiritual platform of self-realization. There is no such benefit from engaging oneself in economic development. So we see Prahlad Maharaj is continuing to give some knowledge to his friends, classmates. And in this particular verse, it's a continuation from yesterday, like Nagari Krishna was mentioning. Of course, the living entity, or the human being for that matter, does not have to make extra endeavor for happiness or distress. They come anyway. So, of course, we can see that this verse is making the point that endeavors merely for sense gratification or material happiness through economic development, they should not be performed. It is a total waste of time. And it's qualified that even if, one thinks that there is some profit, still it does not help you with the real goal of human life. So we see that in this verse, Prahlad Maharaj is not speaking to, assembly of advanced spiritualists, advanced devotees, like, Sukadev Goswami was speaking, or Sutta Goswami was speaking to an assembly at Nemasaranya. Prahlad Maharaj is speaking to his friends who are 5 years old. And, this is how he is speaking as a 5-year-old boy to his friends. And of course, these friends of his, these classmates of his, they are the future householders, leaders, of course, in the Dominion kingdom. But our applicability also for today is that this can be addressed to all of us, So if Prahlad Maharaj is speaking to his friends like that, then, we can also speak this to our friends. And, as we're raising our children in Krishna consciousness, they can also be taught these things. We should not underestimate our devotee children, that if they're continuously hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and the association of devotees, even whilst in the womb, they can also be get this spiritual knowledge and, be able to speak to their friends and classmates in school, who eventually become our leaders in society today. So we see, of course, leaders in society today have no interest whatsoever in spiritual life, and therefore they're not training, their constituents in any way, in any form. They may reference the Bible from time to time, but it's only to suit their own personal agendas. And what's their personal agendas? We can see economic development and sense gratification. That's generally, what leadership today in society is trying to teach each other. So, of course, there's these nice, famous verses, which also is in the Bhagavad Gita, that, whatever a great man does, the common men are going to follow. So we see that there's so-called leaders in society today, of course, mainly in the political sphere, but even, in every sphere, whenever we look at leaders and analyze their qualities and compare it to, the qualities given in the Bhagavad Gita of a real leader, then we see that there's, so much of shortfall there. That there is no interest whatsoever in Hare Krishna. Thank you. No interest whatsoever in pursuing spiritual life. No mention of it at all. What is the goal of life? So looking at this verse, one can think that maybe one consideration is that working is being frowned upon. But no, that is not the goal of this particular verse, and not the goal of the Vedic literatures in general. That the goal is not anti-work. The goal is actually, what is the purpose of this human form of life? And we see that, the message here is that one should not be misdirected in life. So by pursuing spiritual life or Krishna consciousness, then this is proper utilization of time. So we see that, if one is pursuing economic development or sense gratification for that matter, that ultimately, if you analyze it, it is a total waste of time. And of course, time, we understand, nobody can bring back. We have so many regrets. I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have done so many things. But, once time is lost, time is lost. You cannot get it back. So if we look at these phrases, tat prayaso na kartavyo. So such endeavors for sense gratification and economic development should not be made. The tat is meaning, of course, endeavors for sense gratification, economic development, which ultimately is pointing to having a body-centered security. So we don't want to have some security in this body that, I'm strong, I can do so much of work, I can pursue, this type of work to bring me more money so that, I can enjoy my senses. So all of these things is a useless waste of time. Yata ayur vyaya param, because what is the most valuable asset? The most valuable asset is time, like we were mentioning, that we should not waste this human form of life by pursuing unnecessary things that do not give us the ultimate reward. Time never returns. Then na tata vindate semam, that there is no real welfare, peace, or security in these things. So we're missing the ultimate goal of life. And then Mukunda Charanam Bhujam. So what is the advice? That we should take shelter of the lotus feet of Mukunda, one who liberates from material bondage or delivers one from material clutches. So that should be the goal. And if one endeavors are directed towards Mukunda, Krishna consciousness, one can surely attain the spiritual platform of self-realization. So we see, of course, in society today, everybody, even within the schooling system, from a very tender age, I think nowadays, most children are going to kindergarten school, preschool, and then, of course, a so-called formal training from grade 1 starts. But everybody is teaching in society today that the goal of life is earn more so that you can upgrade your lifestyle with the goal to retire comfortably. For what reason? So that you can enjoy your retirement. You've got, no more worry or sorry in the world if you retire comfortably. The idea is to have, a nice pension so that you do not have any want for more money when you retire. So that is the goal of what's being taught in society today. But the Bhagavatam, in one sense, is not frowning upon, that model, but the Bhagavatam is also pointing out of once you achieve these things, then what? And so we see in Bhagavad Gita in the 16th chapter, 11th verse, the divine and demoniac, the demons believe that sense gratification is the highest purpose of life. And we see, Hiranyakashipu, he's also, trying to teach his son Prahlad Maharaj that this is the ultimate goal of life, sense gratification to the max. But of course, from Bhagavad Gita, we understand that anyone who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires is the only one can achieve peace. And then from the second chapter, we go to third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, wanted to read a few verses there. Go there. Karma Yoga. And we can read a few verses before that. Let's start at text 4. So Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, Karma Yoga. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. So we're talking about work, economic development. And we're saying, this is not the goal. So of course, Krishna explained to Arjuna that of course, one has to work to maintain the body, but that's not the all and be all. That's what we're learning from this particular verse today. Text 5, everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. So that means the idea is, one has to engage in some activity. You can't just exist in a void. And, we understand, of course, we're in the age of Kali Yuga, that even, going to the forest and meditating is not, a practical solution for life. Same thing Krishna pointed to Arjuna, because, Arjuna didn't want to fight in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And he gave so many powerful reasons to Krishna. And one of them was, no reason to kill so many people on the battlefield. I can just go and meditate in the forest. But of course, Krishna was pointing out to Arjuna that, no, according to your nature, you're a Kshatriya. And therefore, this idea of renouncing and going to the forest, you're not going to be able to attain perfection in that way. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga, action in Krishna consciousness, without attachment, he is by far superior. So Krishna is describing yoga ladder, gradually one can make advancement. So text 8, perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. And then, of course, he comes to the crux of the matter. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in the material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction. And in that way, you will always remain free from bondage. So Krishna is giving the sum and substance that, yes, of course, one can perform economic development, but you should understand it in proper context, that is not the all and be all. Work, make more money, enjoy the senses. No, this is not. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yagya, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. And then he's giving the process. The demigods being pleased by sacrifices will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between the men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. And then gradually he comes, my dear Arjuna, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice thus established by the Vedas certainly leads a life full of sin. Living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain. So this, idea of Prabhupada even mentions in that purport, work very hard and joyful sense gratification is condemned by the Lord. So the idea is, we have to perform yagya, and if we're not performing yagya for the satisfaction of Vishnu, then again, we've just completely wasted all our time in economic development. So the message we're getting very clearly is economic development does not stop death. It does not stop disease. It does not stop old age. It does not stop us from going to the cycle of birth and death. Therefore, economic development cannot be the goal of life. So yesterday, of course, we were spreading straw. Dasya Prem and Madhupan Leela also comes now to help spread straw, and we quickly were discussing. Of course, Madhupan Leela is now helping take care of Madhakalki, and she was explaining how she's having so many realizations. What happens when one gets old? What happens? That this body starts to break down. So this idea that I will practice spiritual life, once I finished my work and I've retired, is not a practical solution. Not a solution even to consider, because when one gets old, disease, the body starts to break down. So many issues are there. So pursuing economic development, there has to be something more to life. So let's see, what else can we do? We can do some practical things to reframe our work. And, as Bhagavad Gita is mentioning, that if one is performing your work as a sacrifice to Vishnu, if you're getting some income from a job, then how are you utilizing the income that you're getting? Are you using it just to gratify your senses, or are you using it for advancing in your Krishna consciousness? In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 9th chapter, text 29, human life is meant for self-realization, not working hard like the animals. Then last week we also quoted that verse by Rishabdev in the 5th canto, one who works hard for sense pleasure is no better than a hog. So the Bhagavatam, has this way of bringing forth these analogies that, can really make one really think about where am I at, what am I doing? When we hear, these phrases like working hard for sense pleasure is no better than a hog. Am I a hog? Should I be working like this? So we understand that, one has to work, like Krishna was explaining to Arjuna, one has to work, but we need to work with proper consciousness that the goal of life is not work. And then further, of course, he was not just telling Arjuna to work, he was explaining that you have to work with detachment. So, whatever job you are doing, one can offer, that I am doing this work according to my nature, and, I want to offer, this work to the Supreme Lord. Try to think about him constantly throughout the day. Try to remember his activities. And in this way, we can be Krishna conscious. Of course, at work, things are not going to go according to our plan all the time. When we go to work, whatever work we're in, whether we're laying bricks, whether we are, doing some intellectual job, things are not going to go according to our plan. We have a plan, but we understand that there is also Krishna's plan. So somehow or the other, we need to accept whatever result is coming. It is Krishna's mercy. So in this way, we can try to Krishnaize our activities throughout the day, even whilst we're working. Time, as we said, is very, very crucial in the material world today, and we should not neglect or waste time for a second. Of course, as devotees, we're trying to save time so that, we can do our japa, we can hear Srimad Bhagavatam, we can associate with devotees. So, time should be spent on everything that is related to bhakti, and not the other way around, that we just waste our time on everything else except bhakti. So we can teach our children that the goal of life is not careers, not competition, not consumption like society is teaching today, like they're learning in school, that there is something higher to life. So we don't want to discourage them from going to school, going to college, getting an education. No, but we should educate them that this is not the goal of life. The goal of life is to know who you are, what is my purpose, and make a plan of how to go back home, back to Godhead. So we see Prahlad Maharaj, of course, in this difficult situation he is in. I mean, just being born in a demon family, surrounded by demons. So, where's your spiritual association? Where is devotee association? It's just, how they say, as bad as it can get. This is the situation Lord Maharaj finds himself in. But of course, he was very fortunate to have heard from his spiritual master even whilst he was in the womb. So we see that we don't want to degrade ourselves to animal life. We can ask the questions, what is my purpose in this material world? And we can serve, like the verse is saying, we can serve Mukunda. We can not just eat, sleep, mate, and defend. And then Bhagavad Gita assures us that, when we have this mentality of Krishna consciousness, having attained me, great souls never return to this temporary material world. That once we go back home, back to Godhead, we'll never return to this material realm again. So economic development is not rejected, but we should understand that economic development is not the goal of life. We should not worship it. We can earn money. There's nothing wrong with earning money, because we have to live. We have to maintain the body, like Bhagavad Gita is pointing out. But we should also understand that we want to live responsibly. The aim is to go back home, back to Godhead. The real profit of our life is, like this verse is saying, devotion to Mukunda. And in one sense, everything else, can be expendable. So Hari Chakra, of course, used to always give us nice analogies and examples. I couldn't think of a Hari Chakra analogy that I've heard him saying before. But nevertheless, some analogies that, a man works tirelessly for years, has a nice, big, beautiful mansion, air-conditioned house, lots of cars, luxury, swimming pool, all of these nice, wonderful things due to his hard labor that, 30, 40, 50 years that he worked for. But, ultimately, he dies, within such a so-called cage that he's built for himself. And what is the use that, he's built just such a cage that he dies without any spiritual pursuits and continues in the cycle of birth and death. So, we see economic development, that's what it's creating today. This, so-called cage for people, where they have big houses, huge maintenance costs, lots of anxiety for maintaining their houses. But ultimately, there's no time for spiritual life. Then there was this story of the thirsty man. He was digging a well, and he would dig one well, dig a few feet. As soon as he finds a little moisture, he says there's no water. And he goes and starts digging another well. And he digs again, and then, as soon as he hits moisture, he says, oh, there's no water flowing. So he keeps, digging small wells like this. But then we see another man, he digs a deep well, and then he finds abundant water. So we shouldn't be like this thirsty man, just digging so many small wells, jumping job to job, upgrading, your sense gratification at home. I need this, I need that, I need air conditioning, I need, a bigger pool, I need so many things, constantly, like we say, competition with the neighbors, no, that's not the goal of life. Don't, just continue digging shallow wells like that. Another analogy, that's applicable today, that thinking that, because I'm getting promotions, I'm achieving some status in society today, and, continuously trying to just climb the corporate ladder, without understanding what is the purpose of this human form of life. Again, it's the analogy can be used like, dogs, sometimes you'll see if a car drives by, the dog, just keeps chasing the car. And then, of course, the car speeds away. What does the dog do? It looks for the next car, it just chases the car. And, continuously just chasing, one promotion after another, one promotion after another. But this is not the goal of life. The goal of life is to understand the process, how to get out of this cycle of repeated birth and death. Okay, so we see that in this particular example of Prahlad Maharaj and his father Hiranyakashipu, there's two different worldviews. Hiranyakashipu, has got everything figured out. He thinks from his world point of view, he's thinking that yes, power, control, having a huge empire, all of these things, economic development, this is the goal of life. Whereas what is Prahlad Maharaj teaching his friends? No, that's not the goal of life. The goal of life is having faith in the Supreme Lord Mukunda, remembering him, surrendering to him, serving him. This is the goal. And, the example analogy one devotee was mentioning was that Hiranyakashipu, of course, he was ruling the entire planetary systems, powerful controller in the world. But we see the example of Prahlad, he was ruling everyone's heart. Even his 5-year-old classmates, were very much attracted to him. Okay, so in conclusion, Bhagavatam is not saying don't work. Of course, we understand we have to work, but this is not the end and be all. Don't waste this valuable human life that we have. Work with purpose, live with remembrance of the Supreme Lord Mukunda, and invest, this rare gift of human life in Mukunda's lotus feet, serving Mukunda's lotus feet. Thank you very much. dear devotees. That's all I had. Any comments, questions, things that have been left out?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you for your class, Prabhu.
Jai.
Last time you spoke, you posed a question about sense gratification. How much sense gratification should one allow oneself?
Oh,
Should
yeah.
one allow oneself 1% sense gratification, or what?
0.5%.
0.5%. Yeah. Well, here Dhruva Maharaj, excuse me, not Dhruva, but Prahlad Maharaj is saying no sense gratification. And this is that's the position of Krishna, it's the position of our acharyas. Srila Prabhupada repeated this many times, not a pinch of sense gratification. Hard for some people to accept because we are attached to our sense gratification, but sense gratification is activity in a condition of madness. It means that in a state of madness, under the spell of Maya, under illusion, I am thinking that I am this body and I am the senses of this body, and so I'm trying to gratify the senses of this body. But I'm not this body and I'm not these senses. And any amount of endeavor to try to gratify my senses is never going to actually satisfy me in the least. It will result only in misery. Krishna says in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, chapter Vidha Bhajante Mam, Jana Sukritinarjuna, Arto Jigyasar Artarti, Gyani Cha, Vatarshaba, that there are 4 kinds of pious men who render devotional service to Krishna. One of them is the distressed. So how does one become distressed? Distress is what happens when you try to gratify your senses. If you engage yourself in sense gratification, the result is that you have to suffer the reaction. Krishna says that work for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work binds one. And that's how it works. And if you're engaged in a sense gratification, you must accept the reaction for your work. And so you are bound such that you must take repeated births. And in each birth, you must accept so much suffering. So if you're one of those 4 people who would like to gain relief from the distress, then you have to consider that you should refrain from all sense gratification, and instead, not that you stop working, you work, but you work for Krishna, which means that you work as usual, but rather than accepting the result of the work for your sense gratification, you offer the fruits of your labor to Krishna. Then your effort is perfect and no distress, no suffering, but rather you can then be elevated to the spiritual platform, transcendental platform. You can relish transcendental happiness, spiritual pleasure, which is not dependent upon so many material conditions. You can be happy in any circumstance. So what else? There are so many corollary statements. Ishavashyamidam sarvam kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bunjita magridha kasyasvidvanam from Sri Upanishad. Everything animate or inanimate that is in the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. So a devotee does not engage in sense gratification. He accepts what is absolutely necessary for his basic maintenance, but not anything beyond that. Krishna says that, what is that verse? In chapter 2, he says, you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. So you do your duty, you work, you have to work even to maintain your body, but you don't accept the fruits. The fruit of your labor, you're not entitled to that. You're entitled to work. You're entitled to perform your duty, and that you must do, but you're not entitled to the fruits, the results. That belongs to Krishna. You give that to Krishna. And so that's the art of work. By doing that, you never have to suffer the consequences, and you are not bound to material life. You don't have to accept repeated birth. So that's the objective. That's the goal, to become transcendently situated. You work perfectly in Krishna consciousness, but you never accept the fruit of your actions. That's the actually the like the beginning of or the ABCs of Krishna consciousness. That at least we have to understand that we're not this body, and that we're not these senses. And so therefore we have to engage in our real activity. If I'm not this body, I'm not these senses, then what am I, and what is my real activity? So real activity is activity in devotional service. And we can dovetail even the routine work of maintaining our body and so on, such that even that activity becomes transcendentalized. We do our duty, we do whatever we have to do, but the fruits of whatever we do are offered to Krishna. And in that way, we don't have to accept any reactions. So anyway, that's the art, and that's the beginning of Krishna consciousness. We have to get off the material platform. So that's the beginning. We stop accepting the fruits. So the answer to your question is, as Srila Prabhupada says, not a pinch of sense gratification, not even half of 1%, zero, everything for Krishna. Otherwise, if we want to accept something for our sense gratification, fine, you can do that, but then you'll have to accept the consequences, and the consequences are unavoidably that you will have to suffer.
Right. But then I think sometimes we as devotees, right, we justify it that if I'm only doing 0.5%, the Lord is merciful. He knows my mind. I like to serve him. And so I'm only doing 0.5%, and 99.5% is for him. Surely, he'll give me a pass and allow me access to the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan.
Well,
it's a merciful Lord. The Lord is most merciful. I think that's that was my point, that, not just the percentages, but, and also the other thing I was wondering, does any devotees have any examples? Is there any devotee in our midst that has tried this formula, Rupa Goswami's formula of 50, 25, 25? And, can someone testify in a court of law that it works?
Well, we have the example of our acharyas.
Mm.
And Srila Prabhupada's position is that one must be 10% pure, not a pinch of sense gratification. That's the standard. If you want to return to the spiritual sky, you have to be 10% pure. He's also said that, you may not have perfected your Krishna consciousness. Krishna may still accept you, but we don't count on that. We aspire for 10% purity in our devotional service. So not a pinch of sense gratification. That's our objective. We want to give everything to Krishna unrestrictedly. And Krishna asks for that. He says, Sarvadharman Parityaja. He wants everything. Whatever we're giving, he accepts that graciously. He's very pleased. But he wants to know, what are you still holding back? He's looking for that, whatever that extra percentage may be. He wants it all. So that's our objective. We want to give everything to Krishna. And why not? Why not give everything to Krishna? It's joyful. It's delightful. It's wonderful. And it's pleasing to Krishna. So there's no necessity to hold anything back. We don't have to do it. We can give everything to Krishna unrestrictedly. Krishna will be happy and we will be ecstatically happy. So why not? Why hold anything back? Even 0.5%. It's unnecessary.
Right. I think the thing that we'll get excused for is if in the process of practicing Krishna consciousness or devotional service, if there is some accidental mistakes, those things I think the good Lord, might excuse if there's some, fault accidentally. But if there is, this 0.5% for myself, then that's where the challenge is, that we'll have to suffer the reaction. Not that we will be excused all the time for mistakes, because, we should be trying to advance in our Krishna consciousness and not stay stuck. But if we are, making a serious endeavor like Prabhupada and the Bhagavatam is teaching us, then that way we can be assured that we will not be fearful. I think that's the goal, not fearful at the time of death. Otherwise, the living entity, can become afraid of death. So we don't want to fear death. Any other thoughts, devotees, contributions, discussions? Or is it a very sensitive subject matter?
There's a hand up there.
Okay, I'm not able.
Haribo, I've been thinking about this question that you asked since last week, a good one. And I wanted to ask some exalted souls like you and Tarika Prabhu and I guess anybody else on the call. How does recreation play into that, like Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, and then also how to not become like, when thinking about this, okay, not even 0.5%, to not judge other devotees. Like, I was thinking, for example, there was a Prabhupada disciple, who I was taking guidance from for a little, and he would tell me stories of, him and such and such Maharaj that's like very, everybody respects, looks up to. They would go and get chocolate ice cream together. And even Prabhupada's example, sometimes he wanted puris dipped in sugar and this and that. So one could say, oh, but that's not, 100% needed for the maintenance of the body. So how do we not become like either judgmental or even impersonalists with ourselves or others when also trying to, approach what you're saying, just always doing things for the pleasure of Krishna? I'm just trying to understand this so I don't make offenses.
Yeah, nice question or questions. Nice, very nice. These are the things that we need to ponder and try to figure out in the association of devotees. A very, very appropriate, question example that you're giving. My understanding is that, and please, devotees, everybody should share. My understanding is that we should set the standard for myself and not, worry about what this devotee is doing, what that devotee is not doing, what that devotee is doing. Yes, if we want to compare ourselves, then we should compare ourselves to another devotee who has a higher standard. But it's very seldom we do that. We're always comparing ourselves to someone who might be struggling, and so we don't want to go down that route if we want to compare ourselves. So in terms of the standard, of like you're saying, recreation or whatever it is, we should have our own personal standard. And I think, yeah, there's nothing wrong with recreation, especially if it's in the association of devotees. Now, if we're thinking, of recreation outside of the association of devotees, then, depending on time, place, circumstance, it might need further analysis. So I can't think of hypothetical examples. But essentially, I mean, even, in the temple, from time to time, we also have an outing, a men's outing, a ladies' outing. And, one can argue that, well, is it really Krishna conscious, the activity, if we're going to play, I don't know, go on a boat trip or something, whatever it is. No, if it's in the association of devotees and, we are all, Krishna conscious, then we're okay. But like I said, if it's, not done in the association of devotees, then, it needs further introspection. So, we don't want to become mechanical robots. We understand that this bhakti process is joyfully performed, so that there's so much of variety within Krishna consciousness that there's no real reason to go outside of Krishna consciousness and the activities to get enjoyment. And we understand that this type of enjoyment in Krishna consciousness is ever increasing. Whereas, if we're not doing it with proper consciousness or Krishna consciousness, then, whatever enjoyment we may get might, just be so dry and boring that we don't get the real taste. If we do get some taste, it's like a split second. It's just like, engaging in sex life. It's just a few seconds and that's it. So there's no lasting, impression from that activity. Whereas if we're engaging in sex life for, bringing forth Krishna conscious children, for that matter, then, there's some purpose, some proper purpose. But again, we understand even, bringing forth children and things like this, all of these things can be either in Krishna consciousness or just mundane activity. So we don't want to get sidetracked with leisure. Yes, recreation is very nice, I think. These days, especially in society, this information age that we have, people are so stressed, they need some sort of relaxation. Of course, it can be found in Krishna consciousness, kirtan, so many nice activities devotees can do. but still there's room for these things if it's done with proper consciousness. It's all about our mentality, and so of course devotees we see sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times, we are trying to twist the philosophy to suit our own agenda for sense gratification. And of course, that doesn't reap any rewards, or any good rewards for that matter. It just keeps us bound in this body. And so we don't want to, like Darika is saying, we don't want to be caught up in identifying with the body. We want to be Krishna conscious all the time, 100% of the time. And if we can somehow achieve that, then success is guaranteed. Then we don't fear death. And actually this idea of death, even if we don't technically, in terms of our day-to-day activities, even if we don't technically achieve that state where, even when we're leaving our body in excruciating pain, unable to think of Krishna, I think that's when Krishna's mercy comes in, that he'll force himself into our mind. But we should become worthy of being a recipient like that. So just saying externally, I've ticked, I think I spoke about this at some point, or maybe devotees heard me speak about this, that I ticked all the boxes. Okay, Dhruva, he does this, he does that, he does this, okay, does that, he does that. So, someone can tick all the boxes, spiritual boxes, but still, his consciousness is elsewhere, most of the time, because, we don't know what's in everybody's mind. That we can't evaluate just yet. We can just observe from external behavior. And we hope and pray that, just because of external behavior, someone is making advancement in Krishna consciousness. Of course, we know the old saying that when we hear someone speak, then we can really understand where someone is at in their Krishna consciousness. But aside from that, whatever's our internal dialogue is between us and Krishna. And that's, the real test whether one is advancing in Krishna consciousness. Okay, that's what I have. Taraka Prabhu, devotees, please share your thoughts and realizations on that nice question.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm not afraid of controversy. I point again to Srila Prabhupada's example. He never engaged in sense gratification, and his instruction to us was no sense gratification, unnecessary. Srila Prabhupada sometimes made requests for certain types of prasad, never for the purpose of sense gratification. The uninformed might mistake what Srila Prabhupada was doing, confusing it for sense gratification. It was never for sense gratification. What he did sometimes was, because he had difficulty to digest, he had to be very careful about how he managed his appetite. He would request things at a certain time. He would appear to be impatient, as though, he was anxious to gratify his tongue. That was not the case. When he had an appetite, it was very important that he had to eat immediately while he had an appetite so that he would digest properly. He would request certain foods that would facilitate his appetite so that he could digest, because digestion was an issue for him. If he didn't digest properly, he would become ill. So if Srila Prabhupada requested a certain thing, it was done in service to Krishna in order to facilitate his health so that he could perform his service nicely. The consideration was never sense gratification. Now, as far as recreation, Srila Prabhupada's position was that everything we do in Krishna consciousness is recreation. There's no necessity for any separate recreation. Our activity is chanting, dancing, and feasting. It's all recreation, and that should be enough. And for many devotees, they realize practically that is absolutely enough. They don't require anything more than that. And then beyond that, there are certain activities that are recognized as Vaishnava recreation. So they include two things, and you see this demonstrated by Lord Chaitanya and his associates. They engaged in two types of recreation. One was water sports, and in the time that Srila Prabhupada was with us, that was also something practiced by his disciples, and sometimes Srila Prabhupada also participated. We would go to the Ganga or the Jamuna, and everyone would enjoy splashing around in the water. Sometimes different types of fighting, which Lord Chaitanya also did, splashing one another. Advaitacharya splashing, one other devotee, and so on. These kinds of things are acceptable forms of recreation for Vaishnavas. The other form of recreation is wrestling, and that was performed also by Lord Chaitanya, but especially Sri Krishna and his associates would engage in wrestling. So Srila Prabhupada explained to us that these are Vaishnava sports, water sports and wrestling. These are types of recreational activities that Vaishnavas accept. Other things, no. Binge watching Netflix or whatever on the plea of trying to relax, de-stressing, and so on. Srila Prabhupada never approved of such things. Because if you give Maya an inch, she will take a mile. Wherever you give Maya a chance to creep in, she'll take full advantage. Maya is very insidious. One little slip and one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're in really deep. Sense gratification, it's like a spider's web or fly paper. You touch it at all, you get more and more entangled, more and more deeply. Immediately, there's a reaction. You engage in a little sense gratification, then there's a reaction to the sense gratification, then you react to the reaction, and then you react to the reaction to the reaction, and so on, and very soon you're completely entangled and you can't disentangle yourself. That's how Maya works. So we should understand that. We don't give Maya an inch, not even a fraction of an inch, nothing, zero. It's dangerous. Little bit of sense gratification will suck you in. It's just a matter of time. Sooner or later, you find yourself in deep, and then you need some advanced devotee to pull you out. So we don't do that. We stick to the authorized processes of recreation: chanting, dancing, feasting, the activities of Krishna consciousness, rendering devotional service. It's ecstatic. It's wonderful. It's recreation. At least, if you're properly engaged, maybe you still are materially conditioned, and so you need to be engaged according to your particular psychophysical qualities, whatever they may be. But maybe one devotee does not do well serving the cows. Maybe that sort of activity is a chore for him. For another devotee, depending upon his particular nature, working with the cows, being outdoors all times of year and all kinds of weather, is all recreation. It's all wonderful. So there are different types of personalities, different qualities. that may be taken into consideration, but within the scope of devotional service, there's enough variety of activity to satisfy anyone. You can always find some kind of service that you can pour your heart into and be happy with. Everybody enjoys feasting. Those who are physically able can enjoy dancing and kirtan. Kirtan is wonderful. It's recreation. It's singing and dancing. It's not work. It's not a chore. You're singing and dancing. Non-devotees pay. They pay money to go to a club to dance. Devotees, it's just their routine work daily. They are singing and dancing and feasting. So anyway, that's Vaishnav recreation. And water sports, you can do that. Find a nearby body of water and the devotees can splash around. And Mayapur, we used to in the Ganga, devotees would engage in chicken fights. One devotee gets on the shoulders of another devotee, and so the devotees pair up like this, and they try to push the devotee off into the water, and the last person standing wins. The devotees used to enjoy jumping off the far bank of the Jamuna. There was a big sandbar, very high, cut away by the river, so the devotees would run and jump. And sometimes it did not work out well. One devotee planted his head in the mud and broke his neck, paralyzing himself. So recreation is not without its risks. But water sports, Lord Chaitanya did it, Krishna did it, Srila Prabhupada did it, and we do it. Hare Krishna.
Jai. Yes, just one point I thought of was that Maya has no new tricks. She has, just the same old tricks. She might mix it a little, but this idea of attracting one via sense gratification is an old trick that's been used since time immemorial. She's able to capture 99.9999% of the living entities in this way. So Maya has no new tricks. We should always remember that. It's the same old trick she uses over and over again. And guaranteed she has a lot of takers. So be careful of sense gratification. Anything else? Is that okay? Anybody else wants to input on this subject matter? The idea is that there's only 24 hours in the day, fortunately. And, if you calculate how many hours you sleep, how many hours you do laundry, how many hours you do this, we find that there's not many hours left. And if there is many hours left, then it's a problem. You better fill it with service. And if you don't fill it with service, then Maya's gonna fill it for you.
Haribol,
So-
Prabhu.
Yes.
Haribol. Can you
Yes,
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so to your original question about the percentages and following, the example of if it's practical in this day and age to follow the example of Rupa Goswami. So in my personal says we get as high as 40%. And how I managed to do that was I was staying at the temple in South Africa, Sandton. And then so basically by staying in the temple, I managed to minimize my living expenses. And so the rent that I would pay any secular person, it was going to the temple. And then I was also contributing to the university outreach. They needed a rental vehicle, etc. So I managed to get that high. And And then when I came to, and then when I left the temple, I just wasn't able to get that high because of just living expenses. So one can see that the way they've constructed just the financial system, the global financial system, the way it works is that it just by like when you look at even Indian households, right, traditional Indian households, is somebody would marry and then continue staying with their parents, so they would build this massive house and then there would be like 5 families living in that mansion. And so whatever expense, whatever money that you would pay outside, no, it basically stays in the family. So this is even just from a material point of view. Um, it's like very favorable actually to pool one's resources together as a family. And in this way, the wealth of a family can actually increase. But because of mainstream sense gratification, particularly movies portraying the family unit as being a source of misery, so like staying close, even the sense gratification from just having enjoying family functions and all that, because there's been really strong propaganda to break uh, to break that down and not see it as a form of shelter, then even the tendency of accepting this principle that actually let me just pool my resources because now I'm part of the Chuta Gotra. So the more I actually give to Krishna's family, the more the easier it'll actually be for me to maintain even my body. So yeah, that's just my
Yeah. That's
small experience.
practical realization, exactly. And whenever we give like that, then this is just proper utilization. We may not necessarily, I mean, in your example, you were saying that you're able to minimize, so you could, see it immediately. But sometimes even if we can't see it, we should just know if we're following the principle that, Krishna will take care. And so, you'll be able to realize things in proper consciousness. So yes, nice example. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, and that should be our goal, right? Our goal should be trying to wreck our brains to figure out how we can be Krishna conscious 24 hours a day. And if we can somehow achieve that or get very close to that, then we're utilizing our time properly. But if we are not, then the danger is there. That's why, I was telling somebody yesterday, that's why Prabhupada, right? There was this famous saying. Prabhupada said, my disciples are not sufficiently afraid of Maya. That, here I am, praying that I do not fall down. But, my disciples now, they have been introduced to this Krishna consciousness, and now they feel that Maya is never going to touch them. No, Maya is Krishna's energy after all, super powerful. And so she knows the weak points. She knows what's going on in our mentality. What's our record that's playing constantly. And if there's just any loopholes, it's going to be exploited by Maya. So let's not leave time. So, if one is engaged in devotional service, practical devotional service, then, and you can include, sometimes devotees want to include chanting japa. Yes, all of these things are devotional service. But if you can fill your day up with 24 hours a day devotional service, then winning formula. Then you don't have to worry about anything at the time of death. You don't have to become fearful. Okay, any last concluding points devotees want to highlight? Thank you, devotees. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gopramanande, Hari Hari Bol.